We're starting a little early. A bonus for those of you who actually show up on time, to say a very brief thank you to Sean Langdon, who is a real Zoom host guru, among other things, and has helped us immensely when this series first started over 2 years ago. Sean is moving to become president of the Rocky Mountain Mission Center. Anyone that knows him knows he provides such amazing, wide-ranging ministry. I'm sure everyone in the Pacific Northwest will miss him, but we wish him well in his new position. And in fact, there is a farewell for him right now, even as we're meeting. And thus, our numbers today will probably be somewhat reduced. But it would be a very well-deserved farewell. And I'm sure, again, we thank Sean for all his help and wish him well.
I'd like to say we're looking forward to his ministry. I'm David Sellers from the Rocky Mountain Mission Center.
Yes, that's always the upside, is someone else is going to get his wonderful ministry, and I'm sure you're going to just love him as the people in the Pacific Northwest have. Okay, so we'll get started as Paul brings up our first slide. I want to warmly welcome you all here today, and thank you for taking the time to further your awareness of the climate crisis scenario. Today's session has 2 distinct parts to it, although both head us in the same direction of exploring crucial actions to help advance that transformation from climate crisis to the flourishing of life for all. In the first section today, we bring together some of the tools that have been previously mentioned in our series to show how, in a very practical, doable steps, we can each discern and take our next step. However, most of the session will be spent on the second part. Climate scientist Dr. Catherine Hayhoe dives more deeply into one of the most important things we can do: talk about climate change, something I expect most of us, I was anyway, reluctant to do. She is utterly engaging, but we will slow down the video into a few parts so we can absorb more fully how to have genuine, respectful conversations. She highlights both the factors that make for success and pitfalls to avoid. So, on to part 1. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Those of us who are on the North American Climate Justice Team are united in our vision for the future, the flourishing of all creation. We're passionate about decreasing carbon emissions, and we encourage others to join us in making a difference. But it's often hard to figure out what you can do, especially if you're already making some changes. What is the next step? What should I be doing? Whether you're just beginning the journey or have already made changes in your life or begun advocating for systemic changes, there's always more to do. During our webinars and conversations, we've provided several tools to help you identify what you can do to mitigate climate change. One tool is the Venn diagram. You simply draw 3 intersecting circles like the ones on the slide. In the first circle, Write down your interests and skills. Don't be humble. Put down everything that makes you shine. In the second circle, write down what brings you joy. And in the third circle, write down what is needed in the world. Where they intersect is where you find what action you are most comfortable taking. Now, I want you to notice I've also included a separate box where you can list some of the resources that are available to you, like grants and organizations and access to nature and things like that. Using myself as an example, here are my skills and interests and some resources that are readily available to me. So I particularly like teaching and writing. I like hiking, organizing, research, that kind of thing. And I belong to the 34th District Environment and Energy Land Use Caucus, the climate team, and I'm aware of government subsidies. So what brings me joy are my grandkids, nature, art, teaching. What are the needs? Well, there's an endless number of needs, and we sometimes think we have to address them all. But it's better to focus on a few needs than to scatter our efforts too widely or give up because we can't do it all. As prophetic people, we need to discern which of the many needs best fit our personality, our interests, and God's vision. Every undertaking begins with a vision of the goal. In this case, the vision is God's new creation, the earth restored, whole, verdant, filled with the flourishing of life. Pray and spend some time imagining for yourself what God's preferred future looks like. I've put down a few things here that I think God's vision might be, but make your own list and keep it handy as you consider the needs. Now, what will it take to get from where we are now to where you think we ought to be in the future? Excuse me. Identify 3 sweeping changes that need to occur to bring about that vision and write them down. Now address those 3 sweeping changes by adding them to your Venn diagram in the needs circle. That's what you think is needed. In my case, I put unrestrained consumerism, the end of reliance on fossil fuels, and the diversity of all creatures. But those are the sweeping changes. Go back to your paperwork and identify 1 to 3 small steps for each of the 3 sweeping changes. Think creatively, but make them doable. So you can see I've added small changes that will help move toward the large changes. Choose a few of those small steps that you're most interested in adding to what you're already doing. Highlight them and keep them handy. Now let's turn to the third tool we've provided, which is the matrix of actions. Some are personal lifestyle actions. Some are actions designed to help change society or systems. And there's suggestions for both beginners and for those who are further down the path of reducing carbon emissions and advocacy. Now here's a sample of action items in the matrix. Just examples. You can check out the matrix along with other action items, action lists, on our website to identify specific steps that will help mitigate climate change and global warming. It's all filled in for you with plenty of suggestions for action steps. You just need to figure out which ones you like and can do. So compare your list of actions with the visioning tool to the list of actions that you can find in the matrix. And highlight the ones in the matrix that you think you're interested in. You probably will still have many more than you can manage, but keep them for later implementation. Now, what you do next is go back to the Venn diagram and look at the intersection of your interests, what brings you joy, and the needed steps toward transformation. Identify which of the steps or actions fit best for you and add them in the middle of the intersection. Prayerfully choose one step that you personally can pursue and do it. For me, I'm going to upgrade my electrical box. That's my project for the new year. Pursue that first step until you're comfortable with it. Then add a second step. Don't give up. If something doesn't work, try a different tactic or implement a different action step. Each action you take is part of a larger community of effort that can make a difference. Share what you're doing with others to give them ideas to encourage them to also join the effort. And you can use the skills we will present today on talking about climate change to keep the conversations friendly and practical. We're all in this together, supporting one another, praying for one another, encouraging one another. And God is with us, pointing us toward the new creation that's possible beyond the horizon. Lori?
Thank you, Sue, and adding my welcome to everyone. So there's this one more powerful and absolutely essential skill we can add to our toolboxes for climate action, and that's our voices. In November, we briefly introduced this topic on how to communicate about climate concerns using a TED Talk given by Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. In her opinion, talking about climate change is the single most important thing we can do to fight for a good planet future. The rest of today's webinar is going to return to, but dive more deeply into Dr. Hayhoe's guidelines on how and with whom to effectively communicate about climate change. So first, let me present or re-present the person who's going to be speaking with us via video today. Catherine Heyhoe is a climate scientist with a long list of academic credentials. She conducts policy-relevant science. She really is a scientist. She uses complex computer models to predict future climate impacts for local regions, so that way communities can plan for what's coming their way. The daughter of missionaries, wife of a pastor, and mother of a son she adores, Catherine is also, and quite unabashedly, as you'll hear, an evangelical Christian. She is passionately committed to the Bible's injunctions to care for the earth and care for the poor. Climate change, in her view, is not just an environmental issue. It impacts every aspect of our life together: food, water, health, economy, security. So responding to climate change is a justice issue and therefore a calling from God. Now, Dr. Hayhoe, as many of you who've heard her will know, has endless energy for communicating about the realities of climate change. Her passion is expressed in numerous lectures, interviews, and a highly readable how-to book. Catherine has learned how to have constructive conversations about climate change and who to have them with through hard-won experiences with all types of audiences, including her own family. So I want to tell you one quick story. 6 months into their marriage, she was shocked to discover her new husband doubted climate change. And he was equally shocked to realize his new wife didn't believe in it at all. Or that I'm sorry, I got that wrong, to realize his new wife did believe in climate change. She was from Canada. She'd never met anyone who didn't think climate change was real. He had grown up in the culturally and politically conservative South, had never met anyone, let alone someone who shared his faith, let alone someone he was married to, who actually believed in climate change. They had both just assumed the other's position matched their own. As she says, we never just sat down and had that conversation. We both just had these huge assumptions about what normal people believe and then what everybody else does. And much to our shock, we were both in the other camp. So it's no secret, I think, to any of us here that communicating about climate change is a really dicey and difficult proposition. So we've selected 4 clips from one of her videos in order to take a much deeper dive into this topic. The video we chose is a 2019 presentation given to young evangelicals for climate action. So it's less formal and more folksy than her TED Talk. It has a seasonal appeal. It's titled How to Talk About Climate Change at Thanksgiving Dinner, but you can translate that into Christmas dinner and the holidays, however, whatever dinner you're going to be at soon. Our plan is to discuss and digest her teaching between each segment. And just in case, I do want to offer one hint, because sometimes her theological language might make a few of us a little antsy. So here's my hint. First, if you are uncomfortable, just notice that and then translate evangelical to appeals to theologically conservative folks I know and love. And second, I want to invite you to practice the kind of deep listening that cultivates respect, and then celebrate the cadre of youth and young adults for whom this talk was originally targeted. And finally, if you want to view the entire video, just Google Catherine Hayhoe Thanksgiving Dinner, and you won't have any trouble finding it, or any of her other presentations. So let's start with a piece we excerpted from the video. Our team is really serious about taking this topic to heart and experimenting with it personally. So start, as we begin, imagining yourself having a climate conversation with someone you care about sometime during the Christmas holiday. We begin where Hayhoe begins with this question. Who would you most like to have a constructive conversation with about climate change and have it go well? So I'm going to ask, just as before we start the video, to go ahead and put your answer into chat. Really invite you to think about who would you like to have a conversation with. Keep your answer general, though. Don't name any names, so we do kind of know each other. Unless you're thinking of a public figure, respect the privacy and of who you have in mind. But we want to just take a moment to see what's in the chat, see how you all are responding to that invitation. Who do you want to have a climate conversation with? An uncle and cousins. My local politicians. Grandkids. Church members. If I was having holiday dinner with Idaho relatives, those would be the ones. So I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of think about that. I want to show you what Catherine's audience came up with. She used an app called Poll Everywhere. So she was able, with her youthful and tech-savvy audience, to ask this question and then have a word cloud get built in real time. So I want you to realize that the larger the word is, the more people it represented from her audience. So here's the result. She notes, I'm looking at our chat, we've also got members of parliament. And just that obviously question, right now I can't think of someone. Just keep thinking. There's no, that's wonderful. Just to be starting that process to ask that question. So I'm going to let you take that in. And what Catherine notes is that if you combine the churches and pastor for these folks that she was speaking with, they would be number one here. For her group, the faith community was the first and foremost place where those conversations wanted to happen. But it was followed closely by family, and especially I'm interested in the fact that a lot of them are dads and grandfathers and uncles, cousins, in-laws, but also neighbors, coworkers, and friends. And then finally, this video was done in 2019. It's clear that these young people really want to have a word with political figures about policymaking power. And I'm noticing that in our group as well. We've kind of come through with each one of those categories. So good question, says Don, says Rod. It all depends. All right, so let's go ahead and introduce our first section, which is simply, does talking about climate change really matter? And if so, who should we talk to? So here's our first clip. Here we go.
So what I have for you is I have some mostly very good news and just a little bit of bad. Here we go. First of all, the first piece of good news, and if you're asking me, did I create this template specifically? Yes, I did, for two reasons. One, it's the YACA color, and two, it's Thanksgiving also. Does talking about it make a difference? A new study that came out this July found that talking about the climate change or global warming does lead to greater acceptance of the science. So talking about it really does matter, even though often we feel like we're just bashing our head against the wall. Specifically, what they found was this. Don't worry, you don't have to go read these things. I'm going to translate them for you. They found that discussing global warming with friends and family helps people learn important information. Like, yes, it has been warmer before, but today we should be getting cooler according to natural factors. Or even more importantly, scientists really do agree on this. And if over 97% of engineers agreed that the plane was going down, would you still get on the plane? Probably not. What this does is it increases, and I don't actually like this word, it increases beliefs that climate change is happening and human caused. I would say more knowledge or understanding, and knowing that scientists agree actually increases the frequency that we have these conversations. So their bottom line was that having climate conversations with friends and family causes a positive feedback loop where the more you talk about it, the more people know, the more they talk about it. Isn't that interesting? All right, second piece of good news. Can kids affect their parents' opinions? You may think, are you insane? Don't you know my parents? Well, I don't know your parents, but I certainly know several other sets of parents who may be very similar to yours. But another new study that just came out this summer too found that children can affect their parents' opinions. Now, what this study did was it specifically studied children who were middle school age. So look at it this way. If middle school age kids can do it, why can't we, right? It focused on North Carolina in a very conservative part of the US, and they found that parents of children who received information and education about climate change afterwards expressed higher levels of concern compared to parents whose kids were in a group that did not receive information about climate change. And here's the most important finding. Effects were strongest, believe it or not, among male and conservative parents who displayed the lowest level of climate concern before the intervention. So the people who were the lowest moved the furthest, and the coolest thing is they found daughters were particularly effective. Isn't that amazing? All right, so far, having conversations matters. Kids can actually make a difference on their parents' opinions. And, oops, going backwards here. Does this work if we're evangelicals? Well, I was involved in a study on this, as was Brian Webb, whose face I briefly saw here on Zoom. And what they did was they took a video of me talking about climate change, why it matters, how it affects us, what we can do to fix it, and why it matters to us as Christians. And they showed it to students at 3 different theologically conservative colleges. But although those 3 different colleges were theologically conservative, they were very different politically. So one was in the heart of Texas, ultra conservative, and climate change isn't real, that's just a hoax. And then there were people who were sort of moderate politically conservative. And then in Canada, it's not really that politically conservative yet, although Alberta is certainly doing its best to make it so. So it was pretty politically neutral on climate change. And they asked them a bunch of questions ahead of time about what they thought to determine where they kind of ranked on the spectrum. And then each class watched a video. And then after the video, guess what? They all increased to about the same level. So this is the same result they found with the kids in North Carolina. The most conservative parents moved the furthest. That's pretty good news. So, does this work for everyone? Here's the bad news. It does not work for everybody. And I find this study really helpful to kind of understand the landscape of where people are on climate change. So we often think that people fall into two groups, believers and deniers. And I don't like either of those words because climate change is not a religion, so we don't have to be believers in it. And deniers is a really kind of trench digging word. It's like, you know, we are lumping you over there with those people who reject the Holocaust and things like that. And so it immediately sets people's backs up. But what the 6 Americas of Global Warming does, that's what this is, the 6 Americas of Global Warming, out of the Yale program on climate communication, they divide people up into not 2 groups, but 6 groups. At one end of the spectrum, you have people who are really alarmed about climate change. They talk about it a lot. They're really concerned. And at the other end, you have people who are dismissive, who talk about it a lot also in order to dismiss it. And then in between them, you have most of the people in the United States. So the alarmed and dismissive we hear from most frequently, but they are not representative of the whole population. In fact, people who are concerned are the biggest group, and then people who are cautious. Disengaged are 5%, doubtful are 9%, and dismissive are 9%. So can we have a constructive conversation with anyone? We can, except for the 9%ers at the end of the spectrum. Those are the people that we cannot have a constructive conversation about. Why? Because they have made it part of their identity, who they are, to reject the idea that climate change is possibly real, not because they truly have a problem with basic science, but because they don't think there's any solutions that are compatible or consistent with their political ideology. And asking somebody who's dismissive to change their mind about climate change is like asking somebody to change a core part of their identity or even amputate a body part. And you know, that never goes well. So we have to understand that for somebody who's dismissive, it truly, and I really do mean this, you'll understand, I'm sure, it takes a miracle to change their mind. We ourselves are not in the miracle business. We know somebody who is, though, and that's God. And I have seen a couple of miracles happen with dismissives, but it wasn't because of anything that I did. So what does a dismissive look like? My definition of a dismissive is somebody who is unable to conduct a civil and constructive conversation on social media. So people like this, immediately I would say, okay, clearly they're dismissive. But my personal definition is a dismissive person is somebody who, if an angel from God or Moses himself appeared before them with brand new tablets of stone that says global warming is real in foot-high letters of flame, they would reject it. That is somebody who is dismissive. And we all have one in the family. Now, maybe you might be the single lucky person who doesn't. I've actually met one person in the United States who doesn't. But for the rest of us, we all have one. I have an uncle. I will call him Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe had started a few years ago sending me emails, very, very, very long emails, saying all kinds of things about the science that weren't true. And whenever I tried to respond to say, well, Uncle Joe, you know, I am your niece, and here is how we know that this is not true, and here's the science that explains this, he would answer in an increasingly escalated negative way, to the point where the most recent email that I got from him last year was so condescending and so sexist that I could not even take it. My husband got an earful about how I felt about it. So the next time I saw my aunt, I said to my aunt, you know, I didn't reply. I said, what am I supposed to do about Uncle Joe? And my aunt looked me in the eye and she said, Catherine, on the email I sent you on May 8th, I told you to ignore Uncle Joe. Do not answer his emails. Do not respond to him. Do not let him draw you into conversation about this, because there is no point. And I went back to my email, and sure enough, she had sent me an email on May 8th, and it was a number of months ago at that time. And it was quite a long email. And so actually it was at the very end that she had said, do not respond to Uncle Joe. And I was like, all right, my aunt is a wise woman. She knows. I was just talking to a dear friend just this week, and she has a dad. And her dad begins conversations with her all the time. Conversations like, it's been warmer before. People have been saying that it's going to be a disaster, and it's been disproven repeatedly. And all the scientists I ever talked to say it's not real anyways. So this is what my friend did, and I think this is very wise too. She said, Dad, you're wrong. So it's important to stand up and just say, no, that's wrong. But, and she said this after many, many times of this happening, so she knew where this was going. It isn't going anywhere, so there's no point continuing. But I love you, and I always will. So with the dismissive, we cannot have a constructive conversation. But if they bring something up, which dismissives often do, because talking about climate change is one of the most important things they do. If they bring it up around the table, it's important to just say, no, that's wrong. And it's always good to know a few things about why they're wrong. And that's why we have our global weirding episodes. No, it isn't just a natural cycle, Uncle Joe. That's wrong. But not to change their mind, but to show everybody else, the 91% of people who are listening, that there are answers to this. And we can have constructive conversations that don't end in fighting by simply saying, you're wrong, but I love you.
All right. Well, I'm tempted to ask everybody to name who the dismissive is in their life, but please don't start putting things into chat, because we're a very small global church and most of us know each other. So perhaps a better question, let me put this out there. Who here has a dismissive in your family? We'll just show a raise of hands. Does anybody have a dismissive in their family? Okay, all right, all right. Who has a dismissive in your congregation or in your mission center? Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Now, here's the question. Does anyone not have a climate change dismissive in your life? Anyone? I see any? Gotta scroll through here. Oh, yeah, okay. So yeah, it's pretty, we pretty all have one in some way or another. So, the next slide there, Paul. Okay, so Hayhoe showed the survey results from the Yale climate communication. And this is an updated version. So hers was done in 2000, the one she used was done in 2019. And this one is updated to September 2021. And there are some slight changes. If you recall, the alarmed was 29%, now it's up to 30%. There's been a couple shifts, but mainly the main stuff has happened kind of in the shifting between the concerned to the alarmed. So the grouping of the three onto the left there. Now, what I briefly want to stress about this survey results is that it's a spectrum. That it's not just majority and minority. It's just not deniers and believers in two categories. But it's a spectrum of different perspectives and viewpoints. Maybe some of you would kind of recognize something similar that we have done in Community of Christ at our world conferences and our national conferences, mission conferences, that finding how we come to a better engagement and conversation and reaching consensus by not just an up and down vote, but more of understanding where people are along a particular spectrum of understanding and position. Also, having a spectrum like this can also give you permission, kind of like what Dr. Hayhoe was talking about, is gives you permission not to spend your energy on conversations that go nowhere or that may end badly and hurt somebody, yourself or the other person. And also may just conversations like these sometimes can just entrench us deeper into our own camps. So understanding where a particular person is along this spectrum can help us, one, better understand the person, and to find more productive ways in our engagement. Instead of beating our head against a brick wall, there may be other places for us to be engaged in conversation and mitigation and action, without having, energy drain and always being in a conversation that goes nowhere and ends badly. So what I want you to do is focus on the conversation, not conversion. And I know that we're all people of faith, and conversion is something that is in our movement, in our life, but focus on the conversation. Building the community is what we're about, not so much of trying to beat somebody over the head so that they believe one way or another. And another insight from this chart is that less than 1 in 10 people are in the dismissive category. And so, as Dr. Hayhoe talking about, this is a core part of who they are, their identity, a core value. One of the quotes from the video is, she says, dismissives see no solutions that are compatible or consistent with their political, and I added religious and social economic ideologies. Hayhoe suggests that there is very little reason to engage with a dismissive. She instead encourages us all to spend more time with those other positions that we could have more influence, and that's that other 91% along the spectrum. Next slide, Paul. So I have a spiritual practice that I would like for you in the next few days to take some time and do this on your own. And this invitation for spiritual practice is, I want you to reflect on the assertion that rejecting climate change is a matter of a personal or core identity. So these are some of the questions I would like for you to spend some time in reflection and prayer this week. So understanding that climate change is a part of how somebody's identity and their core self is, does that change or soften how you see a climate change dismissive? How does your love or respect, either for the other person or for your own time and energy, I think that's very important, for our own time and energy, give you permission to not have a conversation with a dismissive? And the last question, how does the enduring principle, worth of all persons, guide your reflections and those interactions with climate change dismissives? So I just encourage you and invite you to do that in the next few days. Okay. So when it comes to conversations about climate change, I'm most worried that this is a question Dr. Hayhoe asked those same participants in the video, and she had 4 different categories. And I'm going to ask you in the chats, if you would, please answer this question. When it comes to conversations about climate change, I'm most worried that, and choose one of these 4. I don't know enough. I'm just not the best person to do this. It will end badly, and it will be too depressing. So go ahead and enter your selection in the chats, please. Okay. Seeing a lot of it will end badly choices. Okay. And these aren't all the choices, but these are just the particular ones that Dr. Hayhoe did with her participants. So let us show you the graft that came out from when Dr. Hayhoe talked to her participants. So about 40%, I do not know enough. But the highest one was 42%, it will end badly. And I see a lot of those in our chat. A lot of it will not end badly. So I don't think any of us want to find ourselves in any of these categories. I think most of us have some knowledge of climate change. We've already been doing things, creating choices and choosing things that are in our local area as well as our countries, hopefully globally. But really, we don't want to end up in a conversation that any one of these 4 choices may end up. I think it's kind of one of those things where just people are just going to get hurt if we don't do it with sensitivity and engage the people who we think can really be able to help move climate change education and mitigation forward. So there are some key things that Dr. Hayhoe suggests to help us navigate climate change conversations. Like she said before, end the conversation before it escalates. And one of her suggestions was, you know, if somebody you're talking to is saying things that aren't true or they're not right or incorrect, and perhaps even when other people are around as well, that say something like, this is not true or that is wrong, but I'm ending the conversation because I love you or I respect you, etc. The reason Hayhoe suggests this, and I think we all understand this, is that she's recognizing and validating the other person that she is engaged with, but not allowing a conversation to drag them both down, get them upset. And so just an affirmation of, basically, it's like, you know, let's agree to disagree. I love you, I respect you as a person, but I don't think we can continue this conversation. And this is what I thought is funny. She does this in a video, so you don't get to see this, but she also suggests never ending a conversation like this with, and I'll pray for you. She points out that for her and in her faith movement, probably some in ours, it's a kind of a classic Christian passive aggressive line. It sounds like, and this is quoting what Catherine says, it sounds like I care, but my prayer really needs something like, dear God, this person is an idiot. So please help me put up with them, and please work a miracle to change their mind. And lastly, she says that according to a number of social science research, you and your experience and your stories and how you see the world are the best and the most trusted messenger about climate change for your friends and families, and probably even coworkers. You know, let others know why you care so much about climate change. It's great to have science, climate facts and science, and you know, it's great to have that in your back pocket when those kind of conversations are possible. But we know that facts can be polarizing, and they can be, you know, one fact can disregard another fact, and it all depends on how things are interpreted and understood. So you're more likely to engage in good climate conversations if you share wisely and vulnerably and invitationally more from your heart than from your head and a lot of factoids. So our next video clip, Hayhoe provides us with further exploration into understanding confrontation, our cognitive biases, and role of religious and political identities.
So when we have a conversation about climate change, what we don't want to do is this. Ready? We don't want to be Susie the scientist who shows up with all her scientific reports. Because to Calvin, she's showing up with information that doesn't say I'm wrong. It's information that says I'm bad. Who I am, my identity, who I have built my identity on is bad. Now, this is really unfortunate because what we should be building our identity on is our identity as a child of God, not our identity in terms of whether we're American or whether we like guns or whether we're against immigration. Those are not part of the identity of a Christian. We should be building our identity on who we actually are, not what the world says we are. But that's a bit of a different conversation. Maybe we could do that one for Christmas dinner. Anyways, those conversations do tend to end something like this, or perhaps being depressed. And as our second most popular global weirding episode says, if you're wondering what the most popular one is, it's what does the Bible say about climate change? As our second most popular episode says, if I just tell them the facts, surely they'll change their minds, right? Well, unfortunately, this only works if people are blank slates on an issue. So if I'm a blank slate on dark matter, and you have something interesting to tell me about dark matter over the Thanksgiving table, I'm like, oh, okay, dark matter. Sure, that's interesting. But climate change is very politicized. And so here's where the social scientists come in. Dan Kahan is a scientist at Yale, and they conducted a study to test if we just give more information to people, if that will change their mind. He found no, that people who were most scientifically literate, they knew the most about science, were not most concerned about climate change, they were most what? Polarized. And then he even developed a measure of scientific intelligence, which he called ordinary science intelligence, just how well people understand science. And he asked them, do you agree there's solid evidence that of recent global warming due to human activity, like burning fossil fuels? And he found a pretty weak correlation between intelligence and answering yes, which is the correct answer. And then he divided this into two groups. And what he found is that the smarter we are, the better we are at cherry picking the data that shows why we're right. So what they found was that people who were more numerate, better able to handle numbers and facts and data and science, use their quantitative reasoning capacity selectively to conform the data to their political identity. Let me translate that. Being smarter doesn't make us more accepting of science, it just makes us better able to cherry pick whatever we need to validate why we're right. And here's the thing, we all kind of do it. We all do. The smarter we are, the more we argue with people about why we're right. And so simply having this type of argument is not going to work when it comes to climate change. It isn't going to work when it comes to whether you should eat yogurt in the fridge that's past the expiration date either. My husband and I have just decided to disagree on that one. We are not blank slates when it comes to climate change. And then you might hear people saying, as we do here in Texas, well, climate change is not a science, it's a religion you people believe in. You have forsaken the true God and you have turned to worshiping the created rather than the creator. It is nothing more than rebranded paganism. Climate change is the religion of the left who view prosperous America as the great Satan. These are real headlines, I didn't make them up. The problem, we all know, of course, is that Al Gore did it. And for the proof, all you have to do is look to the internet, because of course the internet has the proof for everything. And if you look carefully, you can see that somebody has actually photoshopped my head onto the choir. So we might say, clearly we should get the Pope to set them straight, because the Pope wrote this big encyclical talking about how global warming is real and it affects poor people the most, and our Christian values demand that we act. Or you could even look to the National Association of Evangelicals, because they beat the Pope to it by 5 years, or 4 years, I should say. They published a report connecting poverty to climate change 4 years before the Pope. So there's all kinds of global authorities explaining to us not only that this thing is real, but it connects directly to Christian values. But here's the interesting thing that happens. My colleague Ashley Landrum studies the impact of the encyclical on people's opinions. And what she found was this. If people who were Christians, Protestant or Catholic in the US, already pretty much agreed that climate change was real, even if they weren't too worried about it, after the encyclical came out, their opinion of the Pope went up. They thought more of the Pope after the encyclical came up. But if they didn't agree with the Pope, even if they were Catholic, after the encyclical came out, their opinion of the Pope went down. Isn't that crazy? So it really just affected their opinion of the Pope, not climate change, because the Pope was coming into conflict with their political identity. And here's what Galen Carey, who many of us know from the National Association of Evangelicals, said, which I think really hits the nail on the head. He said, the reason why many evangelicals oppose action to slow climate change is not on a religious basis, but politically, because they believe the government wants to what? Take away their freedom. But we don't want to say it's a real problem, but I don't want to fix it, because that would make us a bad person. And our self-defense mechanisms don't allow us to be a bad person. So instead of saying it's real, but I don't want to fix it, we have to say throughout the smoke screens of it isn't real. It's just a natural cycle. Those leftists are making it into a false religion. I worship the true God.
So Catherine will go on in the next session to show us her time-tested process for how to have effective conversations. But we want to stop here for just a minute to unpack what she just said. Understanding polarization and that we all have the tendency to cherry pick the data that will make us right or validate our already held beliefs is so foundational. It's foundational to being able to move forward in so many relationships in our increasingly polarized culture. This applies not just to conversations about climate change, but to so many other conversations as well. So let's take a minute to review Catherine's key concepts here. I invite you to put in the chat what stood out for you from this video clip. I'll go ahead and put up what we saw as the main points, and then Dean will read out ones from the chat that we've missed. We live in such a facts and data culture, it's so easy for us to think that constructive conversations need to be about teaching or explaining facts. But that only works with subjects we don't already have an emotional attachment to or haven't built our identity around. In fact, in a more recent video from this past September, Catherine explains the science around how leading with facts, even without polarization, simply creates worry and fear, which leads to overwhelm and inaction, not what we're looking for. So our number one key concept is that while we need to know and understand the facts, leading with them is not the way to have effective conversations. Our second key concept is the recognition that when it comes to climate change or almost any other current hot topic, none of us are neutral. We're all polarized one way or the other. Hot topics are emotionally charged ones in which we side with those who are most like us. While the video doesn't go into this, from a community of Christ perspective, and as we consider the enduring principle of unity in diversity, we realize that we need to begin by recognizing and understanding our own bias. And in the words of St. Francis, we need to seek first to understand, then to be understood. So now let's hear your comments from the chat. Dean, can you go ahead and read them?
Okay, I'm looking for people's thoughts about what stood out in that last segment for you, beyond what Joan has summarized. Laurie says, understanding my own bias can be painful, but it's also humbling. And Kathy had mentioned as we were getting into that segment that we do live in a post-fact culture, that really we argue about what's really true. And facts don't necessarily lead us to what we understand to be the truth. Other thoughts, any other points that you may have from that last segment? Don't attempt conversations with the dismissive. That certainly came through in the earlier segment, that 9 or 10%. Any other observations from what you've seen thus far? Your takeaways?
Andrew made that earlier observation about, trying to find it again.
While you're looking, Sue Ann points out that even an influential figure like the Pope doesn't change people's opinions unless it's one their position is one that they agree with.
So Andrew's point was about being so vocal on social media. And Rod had responded that dismissives can seem like a very large outsized group, being partly because they're funded for that. So I really appreciated that message, just noticing that that dismissive groups may be smaller than it seems if I just go based on the media and social media kinds of things.
Yeah, Lorna says none of us are blank slates, and we're not talking to blank slates. So keep in mind that people come to conversations with opinions and biases. And Andrew says saying you're wrong without fact checking is best. Right.
So let's go now to the next segment of the video, which introduces Catherine's process for initiating and engaging in effective climate conversations. Notice how often she starts with 4 simple words, "Did you know that?" and follows through with a short, intriguing snippet of information. So let's watch that now.
So last question then is this: is there any way to actually have a civil and positive conversation about climate change if just, loading people up with facts doesn't matter and hitting them upside the head with the Pope's encyclical or the National Association of Evangelicals report doesn't do it either? The answer to that is yes. It's yes with an asterisk, because it's possible for 91% of us. Not Uncle Joe, but everybody else we absolutely can have a civil and positive conversation with. How do we do that? Here's the key. We don't begin that conversation with what we most disagree on. So if Uncle Joe says something deliberately provocative, you could simply say, "No, Uncle Joe, that's not true. Please pass the potatoes. Hey, everybody, what do you think of the football this afternoon?" That's not the time to begin a constructive conversation. But if you're talking about something already like, "Oh my gosh, my cousin lives in California and they lost their home 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago in the Tubbs wildfire. And you wouldn't believe it, but they just had to evacuate again 2 weeks ago. They haven't even started rebuilding their home yet after it burned down because they can't get a contractor because so many people are trying to rebuild their homes. These wildfires are awful. They're thinking of leaving California." Yes, it's really bad. Did you know that all the fires in California are started by humans, which is crazy? But now they're burning twice the area they used to because of a changing climate, because it's hotter and drier. So what have you done there? You've connected this issue directly to your family, to your cousin. You've talked about, you've actually busted a myth, because people say we always have fires. Of course we do, and they're all started by humans in California. But we know that they're burning greater and greater area, and they're making it a lot worse. And then if you really wanted to go a little bit further, you could say, that's why the military calls it a threat multiplier. Did you know the military is really worried about this? And if you have some military members in your family, or if you are one yourself, that's a great segue there too. So what do we have in common? What do we already agree on? Our family, the places where we live, the things that we enjoy doing, birding, hiking. Are we members of the Rotary Club? In my TED Talk, which you should watch, I talk about how I spoke at the Rotary Club, and I was like, wow, they actually print their values on a 4-foot banner and they put it right up there in the door as you walk in. So I gave the 4-way test on climate change. And at the end of my talk, I will never forget, this man who came up to me and said, "I never thought too much of that cold global warming thing," which is the polite Texas way of saying I thought it was a load of crap, but it passed the 4-way test. So I had connected to his value system and put it within his value system and showed him how caring about climate change was not opposed to who he was. In fact, caring about climate change made him an even better Rotarian than he already was. How much more is that true for us as Christians? So what things do I have that I can bond with people over? I'm going to do this exercise myself, but I want you to be thinking about yourself too, okay? So obviously I am a Christian. I go to a non-denominational evangelical church. That's a big way that I can connect with people. I'm Canadian too, so our Thanksgiving was actually last month, but we're willing to eat pumpkin pie twice. I live in Texas, so I often connect with people over what's happening in the places where we live. I have a child, I'm a mom, so I connect with people over, what we care about with our children. And I'm a skier, so I care about having snow in the winter that we can enjoy. So who are you that you can connect with people over? A shared love for your family, a concern for the places where you live, a hobby that you both enjoy, a team that you connect over. I mean, they were concerned because in Dallas, they actually had to put a roof on the stadium in Dallas to air condition it because it was getting so hot that the team couldn't even play anymore. It was dangerous for their health. That's a connection if you're both fans of a sports team. And then we need to just connect the dots. So rather than trying to instill new values into people who don't want them, most people do not want new values, especially if they feel like they're being shoved down their throat. We're just connecting the dots between the values they already have, values that you genuinely share, and why they would care about a changing climate. Now, let me just stop there for a second. Has to be a value you genuinely share. So if you can't figure out how you genuinely connect with somebody, you're not the right person to have that conversation either. But often we can connect. We can explain how if we're a farmer or a producer, we care about a changing climate because our crop yields are being affected or our water availability. If we live in the Midwest, our flood risk is increasing. If we live in California, our risk of wildfire is increasing. If we live in Texas, hurricanes are a normal part of life, but they're getting stronger and they're dropping a lot more rain on us than they used to. We know that wildfire is a natural part of the ecosystem across Western North America, but we know that with climate change loading the dice against us, we are seeing double the area burned by wildfire today than we would be without a changing climate. We know again that flooding is increasing, that heavy rainfall is increasing, that sea level is rising, and in Miami they're raising the level of the streets by 2 feet and installing pumps. We know that up in the Arctic, Alaska's sea ice completely melted for the first time on record this year. They had the worst wildfire season on record. In the most northern community in the US, their winter was so warm last year that people thought the weather station was broken. As one biologist said, the term is no longer climate change, it's climate changed. So wherever we live, we're seeing the impacts of a changing climate. We're seeing them in Europe, with increasing flood risk and heat waves becoming much more frequent. We're seeing them around the world, where climate change has already widened the gap between the rich and the poor by as much as 25%. Between some of the richest and some of the poorest countries. And just this summer, the United Nations said that climate change threatens to undo the last 50 years of development, global health, and poverty reduction. If that doesn't hit at our hearts as a Christian, I don't know what does. So if you want more information on how climate change affects us, the National Climate Assessment is a great resource. It has a chapter for every region. It has a chapter for every sector: agriculture, water, infrastructure, etc. And what we did with Global Weirding is we actually made an episode for every part of the US and one for Canada too, of course, I could not. So with just a very short video, you can get up to speed in a matter of minutes on what's happening in the place where you live or in the place where your family lives and how it's affecting people.
So, Catherine, as you've just seen, often uses two stock stories to make her point about bonding over shared values and then connecting the dots. One's the Rotary story you just heard, changing her talk to follow their four-way test. The second story is about how not to do it. Briefly, a scientist came to Catherine asking for her advice on how to get his foot in the door to local churches so he could talk about climate change. Well, she advised him to start with his own denomination. "Oh, no," he tells her, "I'm an atheist." To which Hayhoe replies, "Stop. you're not the right person to talk about climate change in churches. She then goes on to ask him questions about his interests. And after much digging around, he mentions, well, he's a deep sea diver. There, she says, that's the place. Those are the persons for you to connect with. Communicate about climate change's adverse effects on oceans and how that's changing your experience as a deep sea diver. So let's do some deep sea diving of your own. Following Catherine's example, ask yourself, who are you that you can genuinely connect with someone about climate change? What are your interests, your beliefs and values that give you clues about who you might seek out in conversation? I just ask you now to think about that question, who it is that you might bond with because of a shared common value or interest concerning our climate crisis. Next slide. Another way to discern who you might seek out for conversation is to refer to your own version of the Venn diagram Susan presented earlier in our session. So if you haven't already, get a piece of paper at some point and draw these 3 circles. What are your skills and interests goes into the top one. What brings you joy goes into the one in the bottom left. After you fill out your own, look for people to converse with about climate change who share your skills and interests, or who find joy in the same things you do. We wanted to remind you of this phrase Catherine uses in starting her conversations and encourage you to collect factoids, not to beat people up, but that intrigue you, and be intentional, or ask yourself, who's coming to dinner? The question is, or the starter for the conversation is, did you know that? And go on from there. You don't need to know everything. Find little facts that give you the start of recognition because they're connected to your values. You don't need a scientist's deep grasp of those facts. Most people won't connect at that level. And as we'll see in the next section of the video, people resist information when they think there are either no solutions or solutions that will demand too much of them. So look for both. This is what is happening kinds of facts, as well as this is how we can address it together. Remember, this is about connecting the dots between climate change and shared values. There are lots of places to find these little factoids, both for climate change effects as well as solutions. Remembering the factoid sources Catherine referred to in the video, make a note to Google these 2, global weirding and the 4th National Climate Assessment. Take a moment to write them down. The 4th National Climate Assessment has chapters for every region of the country, every sector, and she's a lead author. And I think it's about to be updated. The global weirding has both video and audio, and she created short essays, very easy and accessible, 5 to 9 minute episodes, in concert with her local PBS station for various interests and various regions. And then just look for various climate justice webinars and guest presenters that we and others have created. Other resources we've talked about include the Project Drawdown website. You can write that down. Climate One, another Google, and Volts, VOLTS podcasts. So as a reminder, also here's Catherine Hayhoe's book on the left, Saving Us, a Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. And then just Google Catherine Hayhoe, or go to katherinehayhoe.com for more sources. And just a reminder, she has done interviews with both Fareed Zakaria and Jimmy Kimmel. Now let's watch another video clip. In it, Catherine gives us examples of solutions that are already in the works, which you can use after you've bonded and connected the dots for someone, that you can use to inspire those you talk with.
Solutions, because that's the real problem most people have. Most people don't truly have a problem with the science. They have a problem with what they perceive to be the solutions. And so when we talk about solutions, that's where people say, oh, well, that's not bad. I could probably do that. And then when we feel like we're part of the solution, then all of a sudden we're okay with the actual problem because it was the solution we had a problem with. So locally, I talk to people here about the fact that our university runs the city's recycling and you can support 35 student scholarships by giving them your trash. Everybody likes to do that. I like talking about the fact that we have more wind energy in Texas than any other state in the country. The biggest military base in the US is running off 100% clean energy, saving millions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's a pretty cool talking point for Thanksgiving. We're already up to almost 20% clean energy by 2019. We have entire towns and even the first carbon neutral airport in North America in Texas. It's the DFW airport. So we can talk about the future and how there's more jobs in solar energy than there is in coal, and how the Museum of Coal Mining in Kentucky put solar panels on the roof. We can connect the dots for farmers, talking about smart ways to reduce the water that we use, or asking about, hey, have you looked into drought tolerant crops, or have you heard of carbon farming? And there's even organizations that will pay farmers already to do smart things like permaculture and no-till agriculture that put carbon back in the soil. If we had a price on carbon, they'd get even more money for doing that. I've talked to people in the oil and gas industry, and when I do, I share with them how thankful I am for the energy that they've provided, because if we had a life without refrigeration, without electricity, without transportation, without the medical advances of the last 300 years, it would actually be a very difficult life. And I acknowledge that many people live in poverty today, and those people need energy. We can talk about what's happening in China and India. Did you know that they're blowing us out of the water in terms of new wind and solar energy installations and green jobs? That's an interesting talking point over the Thanksgiving dinner too. We can talk about what churches are doing. Putting solar panels on the roof, doing energy audits. We can talk about what individuals are doing. And if you have not signed up yet for climate caretakers, you need to do this right now, because every month you get an email that tells you something that you personally can do, something you can share with other people, and often something that you can pray about too. We can talk about how Morocco has the biggest solar farm in the world. Why is it in Morocco and not in Nevada or California or Arizona or New Mexico or Texas? Why does the UK have more offshore wind energy than the United States? Why does China have more wind and solar than any other country in the world, and they're selling their coal to Pakistan now because they've shut down all the coal-fired power plants around Beijing? And did you know that over 70% of new energy being installed around the world today is clean energy? Most of that in some of the poorest places on the planet, where they don't have the money to build power lines and to build new natural gas power plants, but they do have the money to buy a solar panel and to set it up beside the side of the road and to offer people the chance to power and charge their cell phones and to run a business. That's pretty cool. So when we have that conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, the very first step is to bond over something that you genuinely share with the person you're talking to. And then look for little pieces of information that you could connect to it. Did you know about the sports team? Did you know what the military said? Did you know about job growth? That the fastest growing job in the US for the past 4 or 5 years, according to the Bureau of Labor, has been wind energy technician. Did you know? Find a factoid. Did you know? And also connect it directly to their values, so they realize that caring about this issue isn't somehow foreign to who they are. It's who they already are. They just didn't realize it.
Earlier in this session, we asked you who you'd like to have a conversation with about climate change over the upcoming holiday season. Since then, you may have thought of other people that you might have opportunity to engage in such a conversation. Take a minute now to think about one or two of those people. Think about what bonds you might emphasize with them. What are the beliefs you genuinely share? What are your common interests, whether they're geography-based or activities-based or passions-based? What are the intersections and actions on your Venn diagram, and how do they lead to connections with people? To get the person or people engaged and kick-started in the conversation, Catherine always leads with this simple, "Did you know that?" and a short, intriguing factoid. In sales organizations, that's referred to as an elevator pitch. The idea is that if you get on an elevator with a potential client, you only have until the elevator stops at their floor to say something that will make them want to hear more and engage more. Sales professionals spend hours constructing, polishing, and practicing potential elevator pitches. What we're doing is similar. We're selling people on engaging in constructive conversation that may lead to action. So you may already have some idea of some intriguing factoids that relate to your connections. But we encourage you to check out the websites previously mentioned or other ones you're aware of in order to increase your climate conversation toolbox. Then think about how you might phrase them to be short but attention-grabbing. Whenever possible, lead with solutions that are hopeful and encouraging. The goal is to inspire people, inspire them to hear more, to learn more, to act more. We have an additional suggestion to add. As with any new technique or process, we will all get better with practice. And as we do that practice, we find what fits best for us and how we need to adapt and personalize it. So think about who you might be able to practice with. And a hint, don't start with people on the right-hand side of the Yale 6 Americas spectrum. Start with a friend who's close to the left in the alarmed or concerned categories. And think about how many practice conversations you might be able to have between now and your Christmas event. We've thrown a lot at you today. We have about 6 or 7 minutes now for your comments or questions around any of the material that's been presented. Dean's going to lead that discussion now.
So quickly, let's start by just seeing who has someone in mind that they might start practicing this process with, and what it is that you have as a common bond with that person. Just briefly in a few brief words. So anyone wants to share that? Just unmute yourself, raise your hand, and we'll see who's thought about it. We really want you to walk away from this session today having someone in mind so that you can go out and begin having these conversations. Lorna? If you can unmute yourself. Did you say, I'm sorry, I thought you raised your hand.
No, well, I could say so. I'm really interested in talking to my family because I know one of the family members used to be a very on the right thing, but I'm not sure. We've never had conversations about where people actually are. And I have never shared very much of where I am and the interests that I have. And I appreciate all these seminars that have given me ideas and given me courage to start talking and sharing a little bit about my concerns and asking about other concerns, not only to family, but to friends that, you know, we've never talked about this subject at all because didn't know where to start. So thanks for all your help.
And thanks for letting me put you on the spot, even though you didn't raise your hand. So with now Lorna's courage to speak up, anybody else want to share their thoughts about who they might have a conversation with and what's the common bond you have?
Actually, yeah.
Go ahead. I can't see all the hands
Yeah.
raised.
I could just add that my kids have given me gift cards to chapters. And so her book is on the top of my list to buy right away and then start practicing. So thank you.
All right. Michael, do you unmuted yourself?
Yeah, in Australia, we have what's called the University of the Third Age. And that's where groups, retirees, learn things in courses. So starting in February, I'm teaching a course on sustainability.
That's great.
So I'll have a bunch of old people to volunteer.
Anyone else?
I wanted to share just very briefly that because of that Yale spectrum, I have a person in my life who, when it was either or, I would have said, oh, that's somebody I can't talk to about this. But learning more about that spectrum, actually, I realized that person is, not quite over in that dismissive category. And somehow it opens up the possibility of talking to him now in a way that I had thought that wouldn't work. So it actually worked the opposite way for me, thinking about someone that I know, because of thinking it's not either or. So.
Anyone else?
Dean, I'd like to get more exposure and conversations with the greater Community of Christ community. I think we have a natural born collection of people with shared values, and the more of our membership that we can get involved and get moved to the left on that chart, the better results that we can achieve as an organization.
That's a natural group, Susan.
One of the insights that I gained from her video was the fact that sometimes it's the solutions that are the problem, not the issue itself. And I was having a conversation with a church member and mentioned my work with the climate justice team. And suddenly out of the blue came this almost attack from this friend of mine about the lithium batteries in electrical vehicles and how those are creating more problems and, are not functioning as well and creating a high carbon footprint. And she was very insistent about that and very concerned about that. I hadn't even brought them up. But now, seeing that video, I realized that what she was reacting to was somebody else's conversation pushing electric vehicles at her, and saying basically, this is the solution, you need to get an electric vehicle. And she was responding to that solution. And so shifting the conversation to a different aspect of climate change probably would have been very helpful and allowed the conversation to continue. And as a result, I didn't know that, I didn't pick up on that, and I didn't do it. So I've learned from this, and I would like to go back and have another conversation with that individual.
Lesson learned. Thank you, Susan. So let me just finish with a brief story of my own. I happened to do some work with the local health department, and one of the local elected officials had set up a meeting, he'd invited the health department staff to come and listen to his agenda for the things he wanted to get done in the next year as an elected official. And he went through his list and then wanted to know what people thought about that or anything else that they thought was important. I saw it as an opportunity, and I think you might just think about where are there opportunities in your work life that are created by some conversation. I just asked, does he have anything on his agenda that has to do with dealing with our climate crisis? And he looked startled, but then acknowledged that it was an issue that needed to be attended to. And after that meeting, I had several emails from colleagues saying, thank you for bringing up that issue of our climate crisis. So look for opportunities in your various life contexts. We'll now, I'm going to hand it over to Lori for a bit of material to wrap us up. Lori?
Oh, I just lost my script. Here we go. So thank you all for participating with this. And if you're kind of going, just keep going. And I know that I'm going to keep thinking about this conversation and settle into some very specific choices and intentions. But I want to close with a story about a man named Glenn. This man came to Catherine's TED Talk or saw it online when it first came out in December of 2018. In May of the following year, barely 6 months later, she was speaking near where he lived in the United Kingdom. He was really anxious to meet her. He'd cared about climate change for years, so he took the train to come see her and made a point of introducing himself after her talk. This is what he said to her. After I heard your talk in December, he decided he was going to go talk about climate change in his town. And he says, I started to have conversations with everyone I knew about climate change and why it matters. I'd heard this talk. I was going to do it. So I wanted to see if that would make a difference about what our town could do. And I also kept a record of all those conversations. Would you like to see it? So she says, sure, thinking to herself, well, this is a new one. He reached into his briefcase and he pulls out this huge stack of papers. She says she was expecting maybe 60, 70 names. No, Glenn had tracked not only who he spoke to, but also who everyone he had spoken to had talked to in turn, and then who they had talked to. And in the end, he ended up with over 12,000 names on his list that came from those initial decision to have conversations about climate change. And within a year of intentionally initiating that first conversation about climate change, the city council in the small town where he lives voted to declare a climate emergency. And they voted to put 20 million pounds from their little city towards a climate action plan for them. Catherine concluded when she tells this story, and it all began with one man deciding to have conversations using his voice. I mean, if he could do that, imagine what the rest of us could do. Excuse me, and there, yes. So imagine if he could do that, what could the rest of us do? Speaking of vision, speaking of giving voice, speaking of taking action for climate change predicated on our joy, we close with this reminder: the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So imagine, know why you care about climate change. That's the place to start from. Why you care. Why do you care? Make connections, share your voice, converse rather than convert, share from your heart with those you love, and envision the future together. And then for all of you, we wish you a climate-aware and earth-friendly Christmas filled with your family, your friends, and all those beautiful things in life that matter the most to you. So go forth and converse.
And I will simply let you know, as you can see on the screen, starting from January through March, because in April, we will have our next World Conference focused on Jesus, the Peaceful One, with conversations on nonviolence and things like that. Our sessions through January through March will be focused on that themes. We don't have actual titles yet, but you're all registered, so you'll all get the information. They'll be on Sundays, same time as always. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And with that, thank you all for attending. You can unmute, say your goodbyes, and we'll see you next time.